First of all, thanks for coming. I'd like to give you a quick overview about us as an organisation, and then I'll get the team to introduce themselves and we'll dive into the presentation itself. So we are Kerv Digital, part of the Kerv Group. We're a Microsoft Solutions partner with deep expertise in business applications. We started out doing mostly not-for-profit projects, and that's still a big part of who we are, and our mission is to use technology for good. We've since expanded and now work across a variety of sectors, and we're gaining increasing recognition in public sector projects as we develop our experience design team. So let's introduce the speakers. So my name's Neil Ashley. I'm a user experience architect at Kerv. I started life in UX many years ago, before the dot-com bubble burst. Started as an information architect, moved on from there into Microsoft, worked for them for a number of years, and then went contracting, doing a lot of stuff for Microsoft after that. And I spent the last 10 years probably in public sector projects before joining Kerv, still in public sector projects there. So let me pass on to Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Kenno-Gallagher. I'm a lead UX researcher at Kerv. Research has been my game for about 10 years now, working across a number of different consultancies with probably about 6 or 7 years experience specifically in government projects, although I have worked across the charity and profit sectors as well. Dom, over to you.
Hi everybody, I'm Dom Jones. I'm a user experience designer here at Kerv. I've worked in local government for 15 years, worked on government projects such as GovUK Verify for a while before coming to Kerv. Here I sort of split my time between user experience and a bit of front end. My role in this particular project has been finessing the prototyping kit. I think we're going to hand back to you, Neil.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Pete. So let's move on. So today we're going to talk a little bit about our experience of applying user-centered design principles in a complex public service project. So we'll give you some background about the service. We'll talk about the research and design approach and show how we tackled the challenges it presented. And there'll be an opportunity for you to ask any questions in the chat as we're going along, and then we'll go through those at the end. So as we know, in public sector, there's an established set of practices and a series of assessments that hold projects to account for the services they deliver. These are backed up by the service standards and the user-centered design principles and delivered in well-defined project phases from discovery through alpha, beta into live. Every service has its own unique set of problems and challenges that service design teams need to overcome. So our discussion today is about one such service with multiple very complex activities and journeys involving a broad range of specialist users across different areas and departments of the same public body. So let's do the big reveal. This is the project in question. So a bit of background about the Environment Agency. So they're an executive non-departmental public body. They're sponsored by DEFRA and their remit covers the whole of England, and responsibilities include things like regulating major industry and waste, the treatment of contaminated land, and looking after things like water quality and resources, fisheries, inland waterways, and a broader role in conservation and ecology. We're going to come back to the first one of those, regulating major industry and waste. That's where the focus of our project has been. So in order to do this, in order to regulate industry and waste, the Environment Agency issue permissions to organisations for a wide variety of commercial and domestic activities that have an impact on the environment. They regulate everything from waste processing to water quality, farming, fishing and flood risk activities, right through to heavy industry and energy. And the process of applying for a permit for any of these activities is extremely complicated. You'll hear us say this a lot because it is. It requires a lot of expertise as well and specific domain knowledge, and above all, it takes time. This is true both for those applying for a permit and for the staff who process them. So our first challenge is to explore and try and understand this highly specialist service with its daunting lexicon, mountains of environmental legislation, and a huge collection of disparate environmental activities with lengthy and, as we've said before, complicated application processes. So first task, let's take a look at all of these applications that we need to take into consideration. As you can see, there are quite a few. And as we delved into the way the service works at the moment, we discovered some interesting facts. There are currently 35 separate application forms with 402 unique pages. The average application was 42 pages long with around 80 questions in it. The longest one we could find was 78 pages long with over 150 questions. And lastly, there are 165 external links to guidance to support these applications. Now, that last number alone tells us a lot about how complicated these can be. And that's not just snippets of a few paragraphs, but it's pages and in some cases volumes of content that applicants need to navigate. Now, the majority, but not all, of applications are submitted by filling in online PDF forms. Now, these forms do their best to handle the complex routing and guide users through the specific questions they need to answer for their particular type of permit. But they do allow a lot of room for ambiguity, and there's definitely scope for misunderstanding and misinterpretation. This often results in incomplete, incorrect, or even inappropriate applications being received by the Environment Agency. In addition, there isn't just one application form for each type of permit. In fact, you'll generally need to complete up to 5 or more separate forms for many activities. So let's talk a bit about who's using these forms and who's applying for these permits. I'm going to hand over to Pete to talk about the research we did and how we engaged our users.
Lovely, thanks Neil. So with a complex service, you might imagine there are a number of challenges ensuring we've spoken to the right people, that we fully understood their needs, and that we've evaluated design ideas. Before I talk through some of those challenges though, let's just go through who our users are. If you go to the next slide for me, Neil. So our external users are those who will be submitting applications and making changes to permissions throughout the service. That's in 3 groups. We've got business operators who manage any type of environmental permission needed for their company, potentially across multiple sites around the country. We've got individuals, people who require a permission for personal use, for instance, water discharge from their property. And then finally, consultants are specialists who either support businesses or individuals in applying for and managing their environmental permission. This could be either leading the submission of an application or just by providing specific services such as an emission audit. We also have internal users who are Environment Agency staff. They play a vital role in the end-to-end service by preparing, assessing submitted applications, and providing help and support to applicants throughout the process. So it's a service used primarily by user groups with a specific need for environmental permissions. And on top of this, the number of applications made for the activities chosen for the MVP that we were looking at was only less than 1,000 a year, and we weren't able to incentivize participants due to conflicts of interest with the Environment Agency being a regulator. So we go to the next slide, Neil. The challenge of recruitment, first of all, was how to identify the right people from a relatively small group to take part in research that have the appropriate knowledge of the process and terminology that we use, but also while not using too much of their time as to wear out their goodwill. Next slide for me, Neil. So initially, we used the existing database of permission holders that the Environment Agency hold, and we worked with our EA colleagues to contact anyone holding relevant permissions for the ability to share the details with us. We also used the database of people who held permission exemptions as those who are not yet our users, but are likely to need to apply for a permission in future. To continue looking for people who might need permissions or were permission holders in the past, we also advertised across multiple company-wide channels using sector-specific newsletters that were sent out, or the knowledge and experience of sector leads in the pre-application team to identify potential future users. We also used jobs title searches through LinkedIn. This gave us a core panel of participants. And at this point, we actually could use the complexity of the service in our favour by using that core panel and running multiple research activities with the same people but on different parts of the service. This allowed us to maximise what we could cover whilst limiting the impact of familiarity bias. Finally, we received additional help from participants during our sessions to recruit others, either that they worked with in their organization or consultants that they have worked with either on an existing applications or in the past. This gave us a richer understanding of how larger organizations worked and the different relationships with consultants. As a result of this focus on recruitment and careful management of our participant panel, we have to date completed over 30 different sets of research activity and collected feedback from 336 people and counting. If you go to the next slide for me, Neil. Throughout all of our recruitments, and despite this being a service more often used as part of our business operations, we remain focused on identifying accessibility needs and the digital confidence level of participants. We used optional pre-session surveys to identify accessibility needs, and during sessions evaluated people's digital inclusion level through questions and observations of their behaviour. This is all being used to consistently assess our participant recruitment and tailor sets of research sessions that might need to specifically include people who are lower down on the digital inclusion scale or those with accessibility needs. Next slide, please, Neil. Our next challenge, and this has probably been our biggest challenge so far, is that a large complex service makes it challenging to get the right level of research coverage across the end-to-end journey. Next slide, please. If we take a moment to replay the GDS service manual guidance for performing research in Discovery and Alpha, we need to understand our likely users, what they do, their user needs, and then test design ideas and prototypes. But as we've already discussed, there are 35 different application forms, over 10 different types of permitted activities, each with their own unique questions or sections of questions. These forms live across multiple services and systems. So you saw some of the permit-based ones earlier. Some of them are also digital. So there isn't really one standard practice across these forms that we can depend on. Next slide, please, Neil. So instead, we've followed a mixed methods approach to delivering research, delivering the research activities you see here, while also making sure that we focus on providing evidence for meeting the service standards for our Alpha assessments, those standards you see on the left-hand side there. This included doing things like feature prioritization using a card sorting activity, which allowed us to understand the priority of features from a user's perspective to inform a feasible MVP approach. We've also used a specialist research tool to help deliver a lot of this research. In particular, it's allowed us to deliver many of these research methodologies at speed and at scale, expediting our research findings and making it easier to allow other team members to observe our moderated research sessions, either live as they're going or via recordings and video clips afterwards. It's also given us greater flexibility to adapt research to meet the needs of the project. So, for example, more recently, we're starting to use video clips to demonstrate specific parts of a wider journey to use in shorter, unmoderated research sessions. These sessions are used to supplement our findings from the more traditional moderated usability testing. Next slide, please, Neil. Alongside this, we've run a continuous discovery through Alpha and Beta, using questions at the start of usability testing sessions and short surveys sent to our participants to validate any new assumptions that we found and to also interrogate emerging user needs. These are mapped on our extensive evolving user journey map, of which you can see a small part of here, where new pay points are evaluated, better understood, and then turned into opportunities for future improvements. Next slide, please, Neil. The third challenge was that during early conversations with users, we found a variety of experience levels and expectations of applying for and managing environmental missions. So it's not been an easy task to represent the full range of needs and requirements. Next slide, please. We started off with initial research from the Environment Agency, which gave us a strong hypothesis that users could be represented by their roles, as we've got demonstrated here with our current persona of one of our internal users, the MPS support officer. However, as we conducted more research throughout Discovery, we found that whilst this hypothesis was true for the internal staff roles that we showed earlier, it was not necessarily true for our external users. For example, we spoke with business operators who managed large numbers of permissions as their daily job. They had very high confidence levels about the intricacies of the process, matching the experience levels we found when we spoke with consultants. However, other business operators would only manage 1 or 2 permissions, maybe only a part-time bit of their role, having applied for them maybe a number of years ago and rarely needing to make changes or to submit data for them. So their exposure to the service was much less. So their knowledge levels and confidence was also a lot lower. Go to the next slide, please, Neil. So knowing this and taking the evidence that we collected from our discovery research activities, we took an analytical approach to create personas focused on their levels of engagement and activity frequency, as opposed to simply who they were or what their role was. We used the 5 different measures that you see here on the screen. How the permits were used, the number of permits they managed, the frequency with which they engaged with permission activities, whether that was applying for new permissions or amending ones they had currently. The digital confidence measured on the digital inclusion scale, and finally their desire to use an online service to manage their permissions. As you saw previously, kind of a lot of people, this would be quite new to them. If you go to the next slide for me, please, Neil. This led to us identifying 4 personas representing the different roles that we talked about earlier by their levels of engagement, from an engaged and committed person shown here through to a long time no-see permission holder. While these better identified the different types of people who use the service, we still found there was a further level of granularity needed to capture the attitudes and the emotional responses we heard from our users about the process and the new service. If you move to the next slide, please, Neil. Supporting the personas, therefore, we created mindsets, which frame the spectrum of people's attitudes and emotional responses. These sit across the personas, so some of them you might have seen on the previous slide were more prevalent for some personas than others, but they give us a much more rounded picture of the types of individuals who will use our service. How do we use these mindsets? Throughout the design of the service, we can keep coming back and asking questions about the approaches we are taking to consider how we are catering for our users' mindsets. So for an example, how would users in a particular mindset react to a new concept or feature? Or which of these mindsets would struggle the most at a particular step? And how might we help them overcome that struggle? Unlike personas, which remain a static representation of our users, mindsets are dynamic, and that's what makes them sort of particularly different, but also helpful in this case. By asking the questions I mentioned earlier and making improvements to the service, our goal is to move people towards the embracing a digital future mindset on the left. We know we won't achieve this for everyone, but even small improvements in someone's attitude to the service will help with future adoption. Next slide, please, Neil. So our final challenge is how to maintain working at pace and at scale when needing to deliver research for a complex service like this one. As you'll hear in a little bit, we found some fantastic ways of streamlining our design and our prototyping efforts. So we as a research team were conscious that we did not want to be a bottleneck in getting user validated designs through to our development teams. Next slide, please, Neil. Some of what I've already talked about can actually partly answer this. So our research tool allows us to run, analyze, and share results from a greater number of research sessions more quickly. Our mixed method approach means we can adapt the type of research that we run based on the time that we have available. And more generally, close collaboration with our design team, our business analysts, service designers, and our product owner means that we're able to plan ahead based on project priorities, new design ideas, or the need to validate any emerging user needs or assumptions made. However, within the research team, we've also split our priorities into different research tracks, kind of an example you've seen on the screen here. This enables one person to take the lead on planning and running research in a particular area. So for an example, when we've got new journeys for a different permission activity that need usability testing. Another researcher can then focus on a different priority, such as monitoring the feedback that we're getting from private beta and conducting specific research sessions with those private beta participants. Should say that this doesn't mean that we're working in silos. Whilst one researcher is the lead on the track, the others are there to support with observing research activities or taking part in collaborative analysis of findings, for instance. But by doing this, it enables us to run parallel research streams efficiently and maintain a high cadence of user feedback to the team, whilst also being able to balance different working patterns and being aware of the impact of things like annual leave or bank holidays. If you go to the next slide, please, Neil. So that's given a quick summary of how we've overcome some of the challenges that we've experienced as researchers on this project. I'm now going to hand back to Neil, and he's going to talk through things from the design perspective.
Great, thank you, Pete. Okay, so let's take a look at the design challenges. How do we make sense of the current landscape of environmental permissions and our broad range of specialist users in order to start thinking about how we can approach a digital transformation for the service? As we mentioned, multitude of forms needed to make a single application. Comprehensive and detailed regulations and conditions make the applications process complicated and time consuming. And as we've heard, among our users, many businesses use specialist consultants to help complete these applications. It's not just the application forms that take time to complete. There's also a considerable volume of supporting documentation that needs to accompany these applications. Once received, the Environment Agency need experts in environmental regulation to review and assess the applications and the documents before they can give an answer. So we need to radically simplify the application process if we're going to convince users to adopt the new service. The initial requirements we came up with were for a combination of both user needs uncovered in Discovery and Alpha and the overall strategic aims of the agency in reducing application errors and processing time. So let's walk through the analysis we did just to better understand the problem. So because of the large number of applications and the various different activity types, we decided to approach analysis in two ways. First, we started going through all those forms we saw earlier, page by page, to understand the structure and order of questions. At the same time, we looked at the guidance sheets provided alongside these applications, and we teased out the specific rules, regulations, and conditions. By the way, this is just a small snippet of the online whiteboard. I think the full version could probably cover the side of our building. Anyway, all of this stuff went into a spreadsheet, and we spent hours and days walking through this with subject matter experts and staff just to check our understanding. Then, armed with all this information, we began mapping skeleton journeys using our little nano screen approach, which we'll talk about now. So this is a look at just one single document, one single guidance sheet that accompanies an application form. Now, since we're dealing with the Gov UK design system, we know the components, we know the patterns, screen layouts and conventions. We can use this nano screen block shorthand, if you like, to test our journey models and rapidly iterate them. So our nano screens, as you can see, are simplified representations of standard patterns from the Gov design system. They allow us to really quickly piece together and sense check how our journeys might look, how feasible they are, and whether we're designing an effective workable process. So using this approach, we constructed early journey maps, just working out the order and flow of questions and plotting points, particularly at which points the journeys might branch and diverge. We continued with our regular feedback and frequent catch-ups with our subject matter experts and permitting staff, just to check the logic and approach again and help iterate, and just to make sure we're designing journeys that are compliant with environmental rules and regulations. So again, faced with multiple application journeys with quite different rules and conditions, we then started looking for patterns. So anywhere we found common questions and application forms or similar conditions and rules in guidance, we cross-referenced them in the spreadsheet, we tagged them in our journey maps, and piece by piece we saw the emergence of a common application framework. So this gave us a structure with which to analyze other journeys that we were looking at. So with each new journey, we were able to test and refine the framework until we arrived here. So our application framework in action. This every application, no matter what the activity, will ask the same set of questions about who is managing the activity, who's responsible for it, where the activity is being carried out, details about the applicant's legal and professional suitability to do that particular activity, which set of supporting documents are needed for the application, and finally the bit where you sign and pay. The only section that's different for any application is the activity section itself. Now, even here we found common patterns, recurring screens and sections, which we could reuse across other journeys. Our analysis also helped us work out detailed logic that enabled application conditions to be applied, as well as determining specific paths through the application depending on how questions were answered by users. So providing a fully featured, realistic model of the actual service to test with users was vital, because some of our more experienced users have this environmental legislation in their head. And if our journeys were in any way inaccurate or incomplete, they would spot it. Having designed multiple journeys, how do we get these built into fully functioning prototypes with real-world scenarios to test with users? Our design framework showed us that we had a large number of screens and patterns that are common across multiple journeys, and we need a way of making the application rules work for any path the user took through any journey. So I'm going to hand you over to Dom now, who's going to talk about how we achieved all this. Over to you, Dom.
Thank you, mate. If you want to drive straight into the next screen, we'll start from there. So, like any other team who's building prototypes for a government service, we started prototyping in the browser using the GovUK prototype kit, which is amazing. A great piece of kit which saves a huge amount of time. It allows you to drag and drop code samples straight out of the GovUK design system. It generates real-looking browser UI for prototyping that the user immediately feels comfortable with and knows how to drive. It preserves and captures page data, allowing you to ensure your journey reflects the information that the user is adding. It's simple to customize. The pages are, if you're familiar with HTML, which most of our designers are, it allows you to generate pages relatively quickly, relatively easily. More importantly, it's easy to keep up to date with the latest GovUK front-end version. This is a long project, and GovUK update the front-end version, so that updates automatically as we move through our long project. In short, it's a really, really great piece of kit if you're making a simple journey. However, after building a couple of our journeys, did we mention that they were slightly complex? We had the group of the journeys we had as part of our project. We started to run into some of the limitations of the prototype kit. The prototype kit does allow you to save your data as you go along, but branching that journey dependent upon the data that you enter requires pretty complex routing on a per page basis. That's not so easy for non-developers, and very quickly, when you've got a lot of that, it gets very, very, very involved. HTML is great insofar as it's quick and easy to make stuff, but it's messy and it creates pages that might look right, but they may not be 100% accessible or properly constructed. Our first journey built in this way resulted in 363 HTML pages. Over 100 of those were duplicates of various pages in different states. Many thousands of lines of bespoke disposable JavaScript validation. I remember looking at it the first time and being quite shocked. It became apparent that coding all of our journeys this way would result in a very hard to use prototype indeed. We're currently at 43 journeys. Each journey has roughly 100 pages in it and counting. Next page. So prior to moving into the next phase of our development, we stopped and asked ourselves some questions about how we could improve the speed and accuracy of our prototyping. How could we allow for multiple nuanced versions of similar journeys? How can we allow for the exact same question to live in multiple journeys and allow us to edit it simply without having to edit it a million times? How can we iterate a design concept across multiple pages and multiple journeys? We know what questions we want to ask, but we may want to change the way we ask them, and we want to change the way we ask them consistently every way that we ask them. How do we allow testing across multiple routes through the same journey? As Neil mentioned before, our users know these journeys in their heads. So we need to ensure our prototype reflects complex conditional routing and allows them to follow the routes that they expect to see them. How do we have our prototype be the single source of truth for look and feel, content, HTML, accessibility? We're putting a lot of work into these prototypes and making sure they're right. So wouldn't it be great if we could also ensure that this is the one place we look at them, so we haven't got to make them, multiple times? And how do we allow for complex conditional combinations of real data into summary pages? Typically, a prototype requires a user to be handheld through a particular journey through the product. What we needed was a prototype which accurately reflected all the possible journeys a user might take through the product without having to create a separate page for every potential step in that journey. Next page, Neil. So we came up with some key takeaways we were going to need in order to make our prototyping easier, faster, and a better match to these complex journeys that our users had recognised. And the key to it, we realised pretty earlier on, was separating out the journeys from the questions that are asked within those journeys. We wanted to have our logic sit away from the questions, as user decisions might present different versions of the same questions in different orders depending on the journey. I hope you can see what we have is we have many journeys down the side there, and those journeys may be made up of different branching logic, but the branches and the logic present oftentimes the same questions, just in different orders. Next slide, please. So what we did was we came up with a single dynamic rendering page, journey page, which steps its way through our journeys, which are defined by JSON JavaScript object notation files. Excuse me, it's harder to say than it sounds. Each journey has its own JSON file, which contains metadata about the journey. It defines the sections that we see within the journey and its branching logic. Each section within the journey is presented as a sub-journey of questions. The sub-journeys bring the user back to a task list that explains their progress through the journey, what the status is of the various sections of the journey they've completed so far. And each section is made up of a group of pages, and each of these pages contains any conditional logic required to render that particular page or the data captured from it. It also contains a reference to the page template, which contains the question itself and any validation required to ensure that data is entered correctly. That's complicated. If anybody has any questions, please ask them in the Q&A. So by referencing separate page templates, we did away with, we reckon, about 50 to 60 duplicate pages per journey. Sorry, the next page. What we needed to do then was ensure that we progressed through the journey consistently. Every time we clicked save and continue, we wanted to validate the data in the page correctly so that we could actually perform actions based upon the data that had been entered. So by creating some generic data handling files which manage how we navigate through the journey and validate our pages, we did away with all that bespoke JavaScript validation and facilitated the kind of branching conditional logic we would need in order to make authentic journeys without the smoke and mirrors of multiple versions of the same page. Having journeys, logic, and pages behave correctly and independently allows us to make a prototype which appears to work just like the real product would. This allows our users to navigate the journeys as they would the real product, rather than our having to handhold them down specific routes through the journey, only clicking on certain elements. Next page, please. The other thing we decided to do pretty earlier on was maintain separate repositories for both the journey and any data captured within that journey. That allows us to reflect not only the actual data captured, but make decisions based not only in our individual journey, but on a journey we may have been making earlier on. An example is a standard or bespoke version of the same journey. believe it or not, there are either complex journeys or even more complex journeys. And if we're in a more complex journey, we might refer back to some data we've captured earlier on in a failed, simple, standard version of that journey. Next slide, please. In order to do this, we introduced two different types of branching logic. We had actions, which are simple one-time actions which are fired when we hit continue on the page. This will branch the journey based upon the content of a field in the page. So say, if I've entered 50 or less on this particular page and then hit continue, it'll send me one way. If I enter 51 or more, it'll send me a different way. With those, we can also we can enable remaining journey sections. So sections that you couldn't start at the beginning, we can now start based upon the answer given in this particular page. More complex conditions, what we call display ifs, and these are basically where these happen before the pages load, and they ask a bunch of questions. Say, have you entered this in the journey before? So, for example, for a total hazardous waste treatment capacity per day, if we accept hazardous waste and we know waste is treated, then we can display this page. If we don't, then we don't. Next page. Some pages created more HTML than any others. And these are the dynamic pages that get generated at the end of the journey. Each sub-journey generates a little summary of all the data that you've entered. Summaries are displayed at the end. They need to reflect the nuances of the data entered. We've been asked to present perhaps grouped together versions of the data. So an example in the green box there, you've got first name, last name is presented as technically competent manager's name and all grouped together. So we need to be able to do that independently dependent on the question. They need to facilitate amendment of data. We need to be able to click change, go back somewhere in the journey, change the data, and then come back here. That's quite complicated routing, so we need to ensure that we did that independently. Next page, please. The task list is displayed at the end of each section, and as I mentioned earlier, this kind of tells you where you are in the journey. So in this case, you've completed the waste accepted section, you've started the treatment and processing section. You can't complete emissions and recovery because there's still something you need to answer in the treatment and processing section that allows you to do that. This was the biggest issue, because if you're doing things in the old-fashioned way, you have to maintain a different version of this page for every possible status. And there were, we had sort of 30, 40, 50 of these in every journey. This is now driven from a combination of the logic in the journey and the responses that you're given to the questions in that journey. Next page, please. As it went on, it became apparent we were creating the same types of pages over and over again, grouping similar combinations of components on the page, so radio buttons, checkboxes, single text field, multiple text fields, etc. This offered more opportunity for standardization and speeding up prototyping still further. Code sample you see here is 24 lines of just the juice of that page, if you like. They're just the content, the things that's specific to that page. That 24 lines allows us to present that page in its entirety, and more importantly, that 24 lines we could then change it to a radio button page or a checkbox page relatively simply. Next page. So in summary, this has allowed us these extensions we've made to the GovUK prototype kit. By the way, we haven't thrown the GovUK prototype kit away. We still use it. We still use all the benefits of it. This allows us to go from one journey, our first journey of 363 pages, to our current 43 journeys, which makes 521 pages. By my rough maths, that would be 15,000 pages to build that in a traditional way. We've done it with 521. It's sped the whole process up hugely. Rather than using 7,500 lines of JavaScript per journey, we now have 1,655 lines. More importantly, that nobody who's making a journey ever has to look at, and that drives all our journeys. 90% of our pages can now be built using just 10 page templates. The journeys we build accurately reflect the rigorous work we've done discovering the actual branching of the product. So we're not just showing one, we allow the user to almost sort of free roam through the product, answering the questions, and then the journey will respond appropriately. A useful thing of separating journeys from questions is it allows us to build multiple journeys at the same time. The journeys are often very similar, and so if once we have the questions down, really it's a question of just saying, right, I want question A, question C, question D, and question F in this journey, please. Can we join them together like that? So it's quicker to build. Each page only requires the unique information that's pertinent to it. Multiple versions of the same page are far easier to manage. When you've got 30 different versions of these pages in 30 different journeys, being able to edit it once is a lifesaver. It's transparent. It sits on top of the GovUK prototype kit without any dependency, and it can be mixed and matched with traditional prototype kit journeys. That first journey that we built is still in the prototype. It's just you can't see it. You don't know which one it is. Back to Neil to talk about simplifying the service.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dom. Thanks for that. So what does all this mean then for the new digital service? So our main goal was to make applying for an environmental permit simpler, reduce the number of errors and omissions, improve processing times, and keep applicants informed of progress at all times. So all the strategies and the processes we developed helped us accelerate the design process without compromising the principles of public sector service design, and in turn helped us achieve those goals. So to sum up, in order to tackle this complex public service with its broad specialist user base, we explored a variety of recruitment methods in order to fully engage with our specialist user groups and combined mindsets with personas to better understand their needs, behaviours and attitudes. We used a variety of research methodologies and tools. We ran concurrent research tracks in order to deliver a high cadence of user feedback to the team. We used our nanoscreen approach to journey mapping, which helped us rapidly iterate journey models and uncover repeatable patterns and sequences. We developed the application framework to present these common components and patterns to users across a wide range of environmental permit application journeys. This meant the overall journey for all applicants had a common structure and would be recognisable to users. We could ensure consistency across different activity applications. We could reuse patterns, screens and sections across all of our journeys. As Dom has just demonstrated, we beefed up the GDS toolkit to allow us to build multiple journey prototypes at speed and to add complex logic and routing to those journeys. And this meant, as Dom said, that we could provide as near to a real-world experience for user testing as possible, and ensured that we could take users through a journey and prove that they only needed to answer the questions specifically relevant to their application. And we believe all of these things combined have enabled us to design journeys, test and iterate anywhere from 3 to 5 times faster, depending on the complexity of the journey itself. So that about wraps up our talk for today. Thanks so much for your time. You can see our contact details here, so please do get in touch if you want any further information about us or what we do. But before we go, we'll just check to see if we have any questions in the chat.
Thanks for that, Neil. Yes, we do actually have a few questions dropping in, and feel free to drop in any other questions as well whilst we're answering the first few. So we've had a question. How did the work on the prototype help when getting users to test it?
I think
it's fair to say that what I said in the show was that it allows us to accurately reflect the research we did getting the prototype right. Is that a good answer?
Yeah, I think you had something to say as well, didn't you, Pete?
Yeah, certainly. So certainly accuracy is one thing. I think as Dom said, sometimes you would be feeding someone through a journey, giving them the right inputs to give if we don't have that routing in place, so that we are basically fake it while we make it kind of approach, get people through to the end of a particular journey. Whereas with this, the whole using this prototype, the whole scenario is much more organic. We can let people do what they would naturally do and experience things like the error messaging coming up, or being routed off a certain way that provides a new set of questions which they perhaps have not seen before, or even to a part of the service that actually gives a kick out that says, oh, you're not able to complete an application here at the moment, and get their feedback on that. I think the other side of it as well is from a recruitment perspective for us, it helps massively. Our users generally are, although the consultants can be have a good range of knowledge across multiple different types of research activities, a lot of people have a very small but large amount of knowledge about a specific thing. So for instance, we are one of the activities we're working on at the moment is waste, but there are multiple types of waste activities kind of within that. So whilst we could recruit someone who says, oh yes, I have waste permissions, actually all of their permissions are about metal recycling, for instance. And so if we then show them something around wood or soil, then they're going to be presented with questions that they're not going to know about ultimately. However, the fact that we could build multiple journeys within a single prototype means that I can have a conversation with the participant when they first start, understand what it is that they do mostly or that they have experience in, and then we've got that journey in the prototype ready to go alongside all of the other waste journeys that we're looking at. So we don't have to be incredibly specific with who we recruit for, or be having to tailor the session to kind of fudge our way through and say, oh well, actually this is just a page that you'd see if you were doing this, and you start sort of taking people out of the realism side there. So yeah, quite a few benefits certainly that we found whilst doing the research there.
On to the next question. Sorry, there's a couple just dropped in now. We have a large transformational project in flight. Have we missed the boat at kickoff, or could we look at UX now?
I could jump in there. That's always a tricky one. I mean, obviously we would always advocate having UX up front. We believe user-centered design is the approach to go. There would be strategies you could look at if you've got that project in flight. One option is to bring UCD in and actually have a look at how you can sort of streamline that and make your approach work in a nicer way. Again, I'd say if it's possible to bring user-centered design in earlier, that's always the best option. But it's always useful to have, researchers and designers come in at whatever point your project is at the moment.
Yeah, Neil, I think if I can add to that,
yeah.
I've been in project before where there hasn't been research in particular is sort of, I'll focus on that, but there hasn't been necessarily research done up front, and a project has got to a stage where there might be designs, there might be development already. Even at those stages, if you start looking at bringing UX in and looking at kind of how things are designed, or putting things in front of users, like I say, with some of the research activities we can adapt to understand if the approaches we're taking are correct, but also identify if there are any kind of particular user needs that have been missed that we can then bring into kind of future design thinking and the backlog. And also, just evaluate sort of what's there currently. So, it's certainly, I would never say that you've missed a boat. There's sort of at any stage you can bring kind of a research team or a design team or a full UX team in, and we'll provide kind of additional benefits.
Perfect. Great stuff. Right. We have got one more question as well. So Rachel has asked, thank you so much for insightful presentation. Would your adaptations to the .gov prototype toolkit be applicable across any .gov application or department, or is it bespoke to the EA?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I would say that, we're using a very standard GovUK pattern. We have questions which are presented in order. We then go to a summary, and we then present a task list. This is a standard way to present a journey in a GovUK application, and so I would say it absolutely lends itself to any GovUK application where you're filling out a long, complicated form.
Okay, great. So Rachel's just put an extension onto the question as well, so another one's just dropped in. So the question actually is, how long is this particular piece of work, and has there been, how large was the team, on it? So how long was the piece of work and how large was the team on it?
Yeah, I can jump into that. Yeah, I think so. So that's fine. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Rachel, for that question. So we have been, I think we started in sort of broad discovery and alpha. So I suspect it's probably continuously been 18 months on this particular piece of work. We're now into the first private beta phase. We have a long list, as we've said, a long list of environmental activities, and these are just for waste at the moment. We'll have other permitting regimes coming, like water quality, flood risk activities. They will be coming through. So, as I say, it's 18 months. We think we'll, deliver probably late on this year, this first tranche of work. Yes, it's not a short project by any means, given its complexity.
I'll come in with the size of the team as well.
Oh yeah, sorry, Pete, go for it.
No, that's right. Give you a break. So there are, in terms of the UCD team, it fluctuates sometimes depending on the stage you're in and what we're doing. We've got sort of between 2 and 3 researchers depending on how much is coming up. We've got Hannah as our content designer. We've got Neil, Dom, and a sort of 1 or 2 more interaction designers as well. Alongside that, we've got a team of 3-ish BAs. I'm trying to think, sort of, we've got 4, but from a full-time equivalent perspective, it's about sort of, I think, 3 sort of full-time who are kind of working. From the Environment Agency, they are providing a service designer, the product owner, the service owner. They've also provided some of the BA support as well. So in total, actually, I suppose we don't stand alone within the EA, so we use different components and services that the EA and DEFRA provide as well. So there are extensions to our team kind of from that perspective as well. So from that side, I can't remember the maths now, but sort of 15 or so. I've also excluded our development team. So we have quite a large development team who are building what we've provided as well, now that we're in our private beta, or even sort of in alpha stage. So I think I remember seeing on our stand-up this week numbers in the sort of high 20s in total. So yeah, that's roughly kind of our team size sort of in total. But like I say, it does fluctuate depending on sort of the stage we're on and the priorities we've got as well.
I'd say it's a big team. It's bigger than perhaps a lot of other public service projects, but it needs to be, because, as we've said, it's complicated.
Okay, I think that's the end of the questions during the live bit, but of course I've got all the information there to contact you and the team, Neil, on screen at the moment as well, and we will share this recording after as well. So yeah, please don't let us stop you if there's any more questions that pops into heads after this. But yes, I'll let you close, Neil.
Yeah, brilliant. No, just to say thanks very much for your time. I hope it's been of interest. It's certainly interesting to us and engaging us all the time. And yeah, as Jason said, please do feel free to reach out and get in touch if you want to find out any more about who we are and what we do. Thanks so much.